The courtroom doors swung open with a heavy creak, and a 17-year-old black kid stepped inside, his sneakers scuffing the worn oak floor. The judge barely glanced up, her eyes skimming the docket, already dismissing him as another troublemaker clogging her schedule. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Cops, lawyers, spectators, all smirking, assuming he was out of his depth, a boy with no chance against the system. But then he reached into his backpack, pulled out a tattered notebook, and spoke words that froze the room. What happens when a teenager knows the law better than the judge herself? Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let's dive into a story where truth doesn't bow to power. It outsmarts it. The air in Atlanta's juvenile courtroom was thick with the scent of old varnish and burnt coffee left too long in a dented pot. It was a muggy Thursday morning in September 2025, the kind of heat that made your shirt stick before noon. Jalen Carter, 17, stood alone at the defendant's table, his faded hoodie and scuffed jeans stark against the polished suits around him. No lawyer, no parents, just a backpack slung over one shoulder and a notebook clutched tight, its edges frayed from years of use. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a focus the room didn't expect. Jalen was charged with disorderly conduct after filming a school resource officer, Mark Evans, intimidating a younger student at Lincoln High. The officer had cornered a 14-year-old for loitering in the hallway, his voice sharp, his posture looming, as Jalen quietly pulled out his phone and hit record. The video spread online, thousands of views in hours, until the school demanded Jalen's arrest, calling it disruptive. The gallery saw a kid in over his head, but Jalen saw a promise he'd made to his father: never let injustice hide in plain sight. When Jalen was 10, his father, Nathan Carter, had sat him down in their cramped Atlanta apartment, a dog-eared copy of the Constitution open between them. Nathan, a civil rights attorney, pointed to the First Amendment, his finger tracing the words. "This is your shield, Jalen," he said, his voice steady but warm. "Know it, and no one can silence you." Jalen soaked up every lesson, sitting late into the night as Nathan explained cases like Tinker and Brown, his words planting seeds that grew into armor. Nathan's death 2 years ago, a sudden stroke at 43, left Jalen with only those lessons and a notebook filled with his father's handwriting. That notebook was Jalen's lifeline now, a piece of his father he carried into battle. The incident at Lincoln High had been brewing for weeks. Jalen had noticed Officer Evans's pattern, targeting Black and Latino students, his voice sharp, his hand always near his baton. That day, in a crowded hallway, Evans cornered a freshman, Malik, his voice booming about rules. Students froze, some whispering, others pulling out phones. Ms. Linda Hayes, a history teacher, watched from her classroom door, her face tight but silent. Jalen stepped forward, his phone steady, capturing every word. "You're scaring him," Jalen said calmly, his lens fixed. Evans turned, his eyes narrowing. "Put that away, kid, or you're next." The crowd held its breath, but Jalen kept filming, his father's voice in his head. "Truth is your weapon." The night before his hearing, Jalen sat in his bedroom, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across walls covered in sticky notes. He'd spent weeks filing public records requests, digging through school board minutes, and cross-referencing his father's notes. An email from Ms. Hayes confirmed Evans's history. 7 complaints, all dismissed. Jalen burned the video onto a USB drive, its weight heavy in his hand. His uncle, Marcus, stopped by, his work boots scuffing the floor. "You sure you can do this, kid?" he asked, his voice rough with worry. Jalen nodded, clutching the drive. "Dad said the law is only as good as the person carrying it. I'm ready." Marcus hugged him, quick but tight, his eyes wet. Jalen didn't sleep, but his hands didn't shake. Judge Ellen Harper, a white woman in her late 50s, sat high on the bench, her glasses low, her gray hair pulled tight. Her voice cut through the room like a blade through routine. "Mr. Carter," she said, barely glancing up, "where's your counsel?" Jalen straightened, his voice steady but soft. "I'm representing myself, Your Honor." A snort came from the back, where 2 school security officers sat, their badges glinting under the flickering lights. One whispered, "Kid's gonna crash and burn," and the other laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet. The prosecutor, Thomas Reed, stood, his suit crisp, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your Honor, the defendant filmed an officer without permission. inciting unrest at Lincoln High. We request a swift ruling to restore order. Harper's pen scratched the docket, her eyes flicking to Jalen. Do you contest these charges, Mr. Carter? Jalen's fingers tightened on his notebook, his knuckles pale. Yes, ma'am. The school's actions violate my First Amendment rights, and I have proof. The whispers stopped, the air growing thick. Reed rolled his eyes, adjusting his cufflinks. Your Honor, he's a teenager with a phone, not a lawyer. The video's irrelevant. Harper's voice was dry, like dust on old books. This is a courtroom, Mr. Carter, not a film studio. You're here to answer, not direct. Jalen didn't blink. I'm not directing, Your Honor. I'm defending. He opened his notebook, pulling out a printed email and a USB drive, its edges scratched from nights of clutching it tight. This video shows Officer Evans intimidating a student without cause. This email shows the school ignored complaints about him for 3 years. The room stilled, a held breath. A journalist in the fourth row, Maya Torres, paused her typing, her eyes narrowing. Evans, standing near the witness table, shifted, his jaw tight, his uniform crisp, but his hands clenched. Harper leaned forward, her glasses catching the light. You're accusing an officer of misconduct? Her tone was sharp but curious. Jalen nodded, his voice steady. Yes, ma'am. And Tinkervies Des Moines, 1969, says students have First Amendment rights to speak out unless it disrupts learning. My video didn't disrupt, it exposed. Reed scoffed, his voice cutting through. This is a stunt, Your Honor. He's quoting cases he doesn't understand. Harper didn't look at him. She stared at Jalen, her lips pursed. Where did you learn this, young man? Jalen's jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his face. My father, Your Honor, Nathan Carter. He was a civil rights lawyer. He taught me before he passed. The name landed like a stone in still water. Nathan Carter had been a quiet force in Atlanta, fighting for kids caught in the system. His briefs stacked in courtrooms like this one. The gallery stirred. Some knew his name, others felt its weight. Maya's pen flew across her notebook, her hands trembling slightly. Harper's face softened, just for a moment. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, her voice quieter. But this court deals in evidence, not stories. Jalen's eyes didn't waver. Then watch this. He handed the USB drive to the clerk, who plugged it into a monitor with shaking hands. It's verified by public records I requested myself. The screen flickered to life, showing a grainy hallway at Lincoln High. A 14-year-old student, backpack sagging, stood frozen as Evans loomed over him, his voice booming. You don't belong here. Jalen appeared in the frame, phone raised, not shouting, just filming. The clip ended, and the room exhaled, murmurs spreading. Reed jumped up, his face flushed. This proves nothing. It's unverified. Harper didn't respond. She stared at the blank screen, then at Jalen. This suggests a problem, she said, almost to herself. Evans shifted, his eyes darting to the school officials, who looked down at their hands. Word of Jalen's arrest had swept through Lincoln High like a storm. In the cafeteria, students huddled over their phones, the video racking up views on X, Jaxer Jalen Speaks trending locally. Tasha Green, a senior, started a petition, her voice shaking as she spoke at a school assembly. Jalen's not a troublemaker, he's one of us, she said. Her words met with cheers and nervous glances from teachers. Parents gathered in a community center, their voices low but angry. My daughter got a warning from Evans last month, one father said, his fists clenched. Same story, no action. The school board sent a generic email about policy enforcement, but the chatter grew louder, a spark ready to ignite. Harper leaned back, her chair creaking. Mr. Carter, you've made bold claims, but you're not a lawyer. Jalen's response was instant. I don't need to be, ma'am. The law speaks for itself if you let it. The room froze. A security officer coughed, his smirk gone. Maya's pen stopped, her eyes wide. Harper's gavel hovered, but she didn't strike it. Careful, Mr. Carter, she said, her voice softer now, almost wary. You're testing this court's patience. That's when it happened. From the back row, a man stood, slowly, his dark coat blending with the shadows. His shoes clicked softly on the tile as he stepped into the aisle, his face calm, but sharp, like someone who'd been waiting all morning. Nobody noticed him at first, not even Harper. He stopped at the bar, his voice steady. Your Honor, I'm Victor Lang, former colleague of Nathan Carter. I'd like to submit a statement. The room turned, head swiveling, Reed's face twisted. This is out of order. Harper silenced him with a raised hand. Mr. Lang, you weren't listed. Victor nodded, his gray eyes steady behind wire-rimmed glasses. I wasn't, ma'am, but I worked with Nathan for 12 years, investigating school misconduct. We filed complaints about Officer Evans, ignored since 2022. I have records. The gallery buzzed, a hum of shock and curiosity. Maya typed furiously, her laptop glowing. Harper took Victor's folder, her fingers lingering on the pages. You worked with Mr. Carter? Victor nodded, his voice soft but unyielding. Yes, ma'am. Nathan taught me to dig for the truth. His son learned the same. Jalen's eyes flickered, a flash of pride crossing his face. But he stayed still. Harper skimmed the folder, her lips tightening. This lists multiple complaints against Evans, unaddressed. Reed's voice rose, desperate. This is irrelevant. Harper didn't look at him. She stared at Jalen, then Victor. Mr. Carter, she said, did you know about this? Jalen's voice was quiet, almost reverent. I found my dad's notes after he passed, ma'am. He was working on Evans's case when he got sick. I finished what he started. The room went silent, the kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. Maya's pen stopped, her eyes wide. Ms. Linda Hayes, the teacher who tipped Jalen off, shifted uncomfortably in the gallery. She'd seen Evans's behavior for years, stayed quiet to keep her job. Now, she felt the weight of her silence, her hands twisting in her lap. Harper cleared her throat, breaking the silence. This court will take a recess, she said, her voice quieter, like she was wrestling with something. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. The gavel struck, and the room exhaled, voices rising in a chaotic hum. In the hallway, the buzz grew louder. Students from Lincoln High clustered together, their phones glowing with clips of Jalen's speech. Jalen speaks, trending nationwide now. Maya drafted her article. Teens video exposes school's hidden truths. During the recess, Jalen stood by a courthouse window, the Atlanta skyline hazy through the glass. Ms. Hayes approached, her voice low. I should have done more, she said, her eyes downcast. I'm speaking to the board tomorrow. Jalen nodded, not angry, just tired. Good. It's a start. Across the hall, a school board member, Mr. Alan Gray, watched Jalen, his face pale. He'd ignored the complaints about Evans, thinking they'd fade. Now, he typed a frantic email to his supervisor, his hands shaking. In her chambers, Harper sat alone, Victor's folder and Jalen's USB drive on her desk. She'd presided over thousands of cases, but this one felt different. Jalen wasn't loud, wasn't defiant, just relentless, like his father. She remembered Nathan Carter, his briefs precise, his arguments unshakable. She'd dismissed one of his cases once, called it routine. Now she wondered what she'd missed. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the complaints, dates, names, incidents, all ignored. Her fingers lingered on Nathan's signature, its loops a quiet promise kept. When court reconvened, the air was electric, charged with anticipation. Harper took the bench, her face unreadable, her glasses low. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice steady but softer. Your evidence and Mr. Lang's statement suggest a pattern of misconduct at Lincoln High. This court can't rewrite school policy, but it can demand accountability. She paused, her eyes meeting Jalen's, a flicker of respect passing between them. The charges are dismissed. I'm recommending a state investigation into the school's practices and Officer Evans's conduct. The gallery erupted. Claps, gasps, cheers echoing off the peeling walls. Harper's gavel cracked, but it couldn't drown the sound. Reed sat, his hands clenched, his notes untouched. Evans stood, his face pale, his boots heavy as he walked out, avoiding every eye. Jalen stood still, his USB drive back in his pocket, his face calm, but his chest rising faster now. This wasn't a victory, it was a beginning. The next day, Lincoln High was quieter, but the air felt different. Students gathered in the cafeteria, their voices low but hopeful, passing around phones with Jalen's video. A group of freshmen taped a poster to the bulletin board. We are not silent. Ms. Hayes stood before her class, her voice steady for the first time in years. We're going to talk about rights today, she said, holding up a copy of the Constitution. A senior in the back, Tasha Green, raised her hand. Like Jalen did? Hayes nodded, a small smile breaking through. Exactly like Jalen. Outside, a local news van parked near the school, filming students chanting his name. By evening, Maya's article hit the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Teens silence shatters school's secrets. It went viral, 800,000 shares by midnight. Jalen speaks trending globally. Lincoln High students posted the video, their captions echoing Jalen's words. Truth waits. The school board announced a public hearing, inviting Jalen to speak. He didn't respond, not yet, his focus still on the promise he'd kept. Outside the courthouse, Jalen's uncle, Marcus, waited in his old truck, its engine idling under a flickering streetlight. He hadn't seen Jalen since Nathan's funeral, too buried in grief to reach out. Now he hugged him, his voice rough with emotion. "You're just like him, kid." Jalen's throat tightened, but he managed a nod. "He didn't teach me to quit." The next morning, Jalen walked past Lincoln High, his backpack heavy with his father's notebook. A mural was being painted on the school's fence, a silhouette of a kid with a phone, the words, "Truth waits for no one," in bold red. He didn't stop, didn't stare, just kept walking, the USB drive in his pocket a quiet reminder of his father's voice. The law bends if you know where to push. Jalen was still pushing. This isn't just about one kid or one courtroom. It's about what happens when someone refuses to be silenced, when a teenager outsmarts the system with nothing but truth. Have you ever seen someone underestimated change everything? Drop it in the comments. Share this story if it moved you, and let's keep this conversation alive. Subscribe for more tales of courage, truth, and the voices that shift the world. See you in the next one.